Your company just launched an AI initiative. Leadership is excited. There's a roadmap. Big words like transformation are flying around, but your middle managers are lying awake at night. Hi, I'm Sarah Wilson, a fractional COO and an operational turnaround partner for SMB. I help businesses struggling with complexity and challenges in their back office, and I work with founders to install scalable, repeatable processes. Middle managers have the toughest job. They are the glue that holds our organizations together. They are often the ones training our front lines and the ones who translate our big shiny strategies into work that happens every day. They are absorbing all of that learning while at the same time dealing with the pressures they get from all angles. Executives ensuring that their strategy is moving forward, and pressure, of course, from their people on the front lines. Having held this role in my own career, I have a lot of empathy for the position. With that in mind, I keep seeing the same things inside organizations right now. The AI rollout gets announced. The transformation is upon us. The strategy is real, and so is the investment. But somewhere between the boardroom and the front lines, something breaks down. And who's absorbing that breakdown? The middle managers. Today, I want to talk about why that's happening, what it's actually costing our organizations, and what the companies who are doing this right are doing differently. Let me start with what the research tells us because this is important. Several years ago, McKinsey identified that managers are overwhelmed by context switching, by a high number of meetings, fragmented responsibilities, and they recommended a redesign of the role. McKinsey found that it really wasn't about the number of hours worked per se, but really around the complexity of the role and feeling very much in the middle. The report done by HRD Connect, Why Middle Manager Burnout is Becoming a Structural Business Risk, argues that middle manager burnout is rising faster than any other group and frames it as a structural issue. It's tied to constant change, hybrid work, and other complexities that come about from being stuck in the middle. It's that they're being asked to absorb the human cost of transformation, the questions, the confusion from the teams, and of course the pressure to move all the work forward. And without any additional support, clarity, or even the right amount of accountability and authority, they're struggling. HBR published a piece this month called The Last Mile Problem. One finding really stood out to me. 91% of leaders say that the biggest barrier to AI adoption isn't the technology, but it's the change that comes along with it. The requirements of change management, as well as the cultural change within the organization. So we're spending millions on the technology, but aren't doing anything to help the people who have to make it land. We often attribute the term last mile to logistics, but it applies to the last mile of delivery of anything within your business. And who sits in that gap? The middle managers. Middle managers are the connective tissue within your organization, the glue, if you will. They translate strategy into actual work, and they are often the holders of the largest institutional knowledge. I mean, I think we all have one of these people in our companies who just knows what's going on. They know the tech the best. They know what happens in between, and of course, they know where things break down. They also carry the relationships of the people who are doing the work. And right now, a lot of them are running on empty. Here's what I think is really happening and why it's more serious than most leaders realize. A researcher named Dr. Ravi Kalluri has been studying what he calls algorithmic management. What happens to leadership capability when the machines start making the decisions? Dr. Kalluri is a professor at Northeastern University and has over 30 years of experience in engineering operations and with large-scale tech organizations like Amazon, Cisco, and Ericsson. His work focuses on how AI is changing how organizations are run, making the shift from people to systems. He studies leadership and human AI collaboration and what happens to management capability as more decisions are becoming not only data-driven, but also automated about the roles that used to develop great managers. I used to have one. They would often be very busy, high volume, often high stress, but the repeating so many decisions that had to be made in a day made sure that we got really good at it. Many companies the world over have progressively started automating this decision making. This decision making used to be, when done by humans, a great training ground for good judgment, scheduling, inventory reordering, flagging performance, routing decisions. Those are just some samples of decision making processes that used to be done by humans. Every time a manager had to make a call, even a small one, it was a rep. They were building something. Every time a manager had to look at a situation and make a judgment call, even a small one, they were building a capability. Pattern recognition, situational awareness, the ability to read a problem before it came a crisis. I know from my own experience that day-to-day decision making helped build the foundation for how I learned to be strategic. To put it another way, the ability to see from 10,000 feet was rooted in my ability to understand the smaller decisions and to their impact. And that came through practice. Now, when the algorithm handles it, the rep disappears. And this doesn't really show up in any of the ROI calculations that we do when we're thinking about how to roll out AI. Where do the next executives come from if we've automated all of the small day-to-day decision making? Great question. We are systematically removing decisions that teach people how to think and replacing them with dashboards to tell us what happened in the past. That's not a technology problem. That's a system design problem. And of course, it starts what we're asking the middle managers to do now. Because here's the thing, they still feel the weight of the decisions. They're just increasingly removed from the ability to shape them. So what does that get you? That gets you with someone who's stuck in this in-between space. They're carrying the weight and the accountability of the decision, but they don't have the agency to actually impact it themselves. Those decisions have really been made by the algorithm. How might that feel for a middle manager? You start second guessing yourself. But when issues arise, is it their decision making and judgment, or was that the algorithm that made the decision? And over time, that tension can turn into stress because, well, you're still responsible. You're not in control. Here's the assumption that's happening underneath. We think that if we automate the small decisions, free up the manager, then they're going to have more time to spend on higher value work. Makes sense, right? Maybe being more strategic. They're going to have more time to coach their teams, and they'll be spending their time on higher value work, like solving the harder problems of the business. That's a completely reasonable expectation. That is exactly why you might roll out AI in your business. Here's what I'm actually seeing, however. When you remove the routine decisions, the ones that used to require judgment, you don't really free up a manager. You're just taking something important away from them, because those decisions weren't just tasks. They were really reps. They were practice. And you always tend to start with smaller decisions and stacking those on slightly bigger ones and slightly bigger ones to build, again, that muscle of decision making. And then taking that away, managers stop trusting their own ability to read a situation. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's just slowly over time. By the system being there to catch them, if you will, what you end up with is managers who are always looking to the system and not being able to have that critical thinking judgment on their own. And what happens when the system breaks or, we've programmed it wrong? It's not something that happens often, but when that situation does, and you've taken that away from your middle managers, they're not going to be able to drop in and make the right decision in those scenarios. And in those scenarios, what then happens over time is more escalation. And more escalation means that problems travel upward. The manager will escalate to a director. The director, of course, escalates to a VP. And suddenly you have your senior leadership team making decisions that really didn't belong with them because nobody trusts themselves to decide. If you've ever looked around and wondered why your senior leadership team is in the weeds, that's why. And why everything seems that need their involvement. You've built an organization where the judgment has atrophied in the middle layer and now lives with the top executive layer. And that's not intentional. But that's what happens when middle managers don't get to make the decisions anymore. And when middle managers no longer get to make those decisions, then other skills suffer as a result. For example, the ability to communicate starts to suffer. So it becomes more and more difficult. If you stop making decisions and stop getting that practice, then your ability to say, here's what I saw, here's what I think, here's what I think is the right thing to do, it just no longer becomes part of the skill set. So the accountability issue that arises from all of this is very real. Managers are on the hook for decisions that they didn't really have a hand in making. We've systematically reduced the conditions that build good judgment, and then are often surprised to find ourselves with not a lot of good judgment around us. So what does it look like when an organization gets this right? Now, I want to be clear about something first. This isn't a simple, wellness program or mental health day. We need to get to the root cause of what's causing our middle managers to be so stressed, and we really need to fix the problem systemically. First, we need to ask, how did we build this situation, and what do we need to fix to change it? Again, what's the root cause? So here's what I observe. First, we need to protect decision ownership. We need to get deliberate about who's making decisions and keep those decisions with people. Yes, AI can help and AI can be a thought partner, but the decisions need to live with the people. Also, we're not going to automate everything that can be automated. We need to ask ourselves what should be automated and what shouldn't. Now, this sounds simple, but it requires real discipline. Now, this sounds simple, but it can be challenging because the short-term ROI on the surface will always be more when we automate things. However, we need to look at what we're doing to those managers because we need to continue to build that decision-making skill into the humans. Next, we give our managers the story, an actual narrative that a middle manager can walk into a room and deliver confidently. Here's what we're doing. Here's why it's important. Here's what it means for your work, and here's what's changing, and here's what's still yours to decide. Personally, I'm a designated change manager. I'm really passionate about ensuring that we do change right in our organizations. ProSci, one of the leading change management research organizations, has found two of the strongest predictors of successful transformation are visible executive sponsorship and well-prepared middle managers. Not one or the other, but now those are both equally important. While the sponsorship support really matters, how we prepare our middle managers and how this is going to land with the teams matters the most. And prepared doesn't necessarily mean that an individual is really good at using the tool, for example. Prepared is about understand what to say when people are anxious, when teams are resisting a change, or they're scared about what's going to be different in the future. That middle manager needs to have the confidence to speak to that and to help allay those fears. Third, we need to make it safe for managers to push back. Right now, most middle managers are struggling with transformation. They're worried that challenges with a given rollout will reflect poorly on them. And this isn't a performance issue for them. We need to make space for them to safely share the concerns that they get from their teams. And we need to respond to the feedback that they give us in the right way. Feedback from the front line is one of the most valuable pieces of information you can get during a transformation. Understanding what that pushback is lets you get a peek into the future of what might go wrong, what might need to be different, and where things will break down. So that feedback you're going to get, that often comes from the resistance, let your middle managers share that with you. Patterns I see in successful organizations is really when the leadership stands behind and fully supports the middle managers, giving them the tools for the transformation to be successful. They're acting as one cohesive team. So if you're a senior leader watching this, I want to give you something concrete to walk away with. The instinct you might have when you hear middle manager burnout is to add something, to introduce a new program, a new check-in cadence. And I understand that because that feels like we're doing something. But based on what we've just walked through, the problem isn't that managers need more layers or support layered on top of a broken system, the structure of the system actually is what needs to change. Here's where I start. Audit what you've taken away. Ask your middle managers to map the decisions that they own and not to reverse them necessarily, but you need to understand what your organization has traded away again to the algorithm. Look at what those decisions that you've automated, what they were building. Understand that behind the scenes, those now automated decisions used to build judgment, pattern recognition, and the instincts of what happens in between the functions sometimes. So, because this leads to an important question that you're asking yourself. Are we developing these middle managers for the next level? 3, give your managers something to stand behind. Not a talking point, but real narrative. Make sure that your managers can step into that next meeting they have with their teams with all the confidence they need about transformation. What it is, what's changing, what's going to happen. They need to be able to answer all of those confidently. And if you're a middle manager watching this, I want to say this directly to you. The role you have is hard. What you do every day holds your organization together. And this isn't a you problem, this is a structure problem. And the organizations that are worth staying with are the ones that look at this and understand what needs to change. This is a conversation I think a lot of teams need to have right now before middle manager burnout becomes a retention crisis. If this landed for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're working through this in your own organization, drop a comment below. Follow along for more operational leadership and what it actually takes to scale without burning out the people who hold the business together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.